Anyone better to follow that up with?
I'll never forget you.
And I'll never forget you either. Then a fellow from Manhattan College talking about why don't we teach the senses, Michael Plugh.
All right. Seems very unfair, especially since I also have a song about Alfred Korzybski to share with you today. All right. Good afternoon. Hello to everyone out there in streaming land as well. We're happy to have folks out there participating virtually. I came to present a talk to you called Why Don't We Teach the Senses? I'd like to talk to you a little bit about teaching for the few minutes I have here today. I've had occasion to reflect on what I understand and believe about this undertaking and its position in our shared experiences. Some of the thoughts I've had about teaching are general and you might say existentially oriented, while others are quite specific and practical. Now, I'd like to get a cynical part of these thoughts out of the way first in hopes you'll forgive my grumbling in favor of happier and more inspiring things to come a bit later. It occurs to me that not everyone is especially good at their jobs. In fact, it might be fair to say that across the entire human family, some people can be evaluated very highly at the things they do on any given day. Others may be deemed adequate, while some are thought to be quite bad at their labors. I'm trying to be careful to express to you that these evaluations can be very subjective and fit neatly into some of the traps that general semantics warns us to avoid. Some people don't see eye to eye well. Some personalities clash while others are more amenable. Some people value one thing very highly, while others may consider the same thing worthless or irrelevant. In this instance, I'm talking about our general aptitudes for some tasks over others. Some of us seem naturally gifted at cooking or painting or music or language learning. Sorry. Alfred Korzybski, sorry. Sorry. Others have to work much harder to achieve basic competencies in these things. Each of us has strengths that we can identify and leverage for our own benefit and for the benefit of others around us, but sometimes we find ourselves in over our heads for one reason or another, and our encounters with people who depend on us are awkward, uncomfortable, overly challenging, and so on. This is a long-winded way to say that just because a person is very good at learning or studying or schooling, whatever that means, doesn't automatically make them a good teacher. And yet, in my estimation, and I could be wrong about this, of course, there are more than a few teachers round and about us who aren't especially effective or natural or talented at some of the things required to perform the work well, or even adequately at times. I would argue that this is true of teachers, executives of various sorts, managers, mechanics, engineers, graphic designers, architects, or salespeople. There are simply too many of us for everyone to be good at the things we do to make our livings. Some of us fall into these things by circumstance and carry on by momentum until such a point that it becomes obvious that the situation is a poor fit and a change becomes necessary. I expect that you're listening to this, imagining the coworkers you have or had who fit this bill. Maybe some of you are reflecting on yourselves at the moment. Rest assured, I'm not talking about any of you, as far as you know. It strikes me that one of the issues with folks who aren't especially effective or natural at teaching is that they focus too much on themselves in the project and not enough about the others in their company. As, quote, good students, some teachers expect they'll be successful at their job by virtue of the successes they had as students, trusting that they know what they're talking about, or at least that they know more than the students in their charge. In this orientation, the mistake is in thinking that the subject or the information is the key to success in the arena. If they keep building syllabi full of great readings and lectures, the objective will be met, and they'll be, quote, good at their jobs. If something called knowledge is passed along, delivered, the requirements of the job description will be met. I find this particularly vexing as a scholar and teacher of communication. One of the foundational ideas of our field is the idea that one first puts on their audience in order to communicate effectively. The idea is the fuel for any decent experience with public speaking or related subjects. It's Aristotle. What do the people in your company need? How will they understand and respond to communication that originates from us? Are there differences in the individual needs and styles within the group? And how can effective change be produced for each of those individuals in their interactions with the teacher, or with each other for that matter? Are there varying modes of communication that will accomplish growth and understanding in different important ways? What do they look like? Are we continuing to do the same sorts of things indefinitely because they're effective for all learners? Or are there ways that professionalizing practices result in a disconnect between teachers and learners? Which of these disconnects are related to culture, age, experience, the broader technological and symbolic environments, and so on? How different are the learning environments we produce in 2023 from 1923? On the surface, they're very different. We rush to inject new technologies into these environments, thinking that they'll help us make up for the inadequacies of reaching whoever the new generation of youngsters is before us. We add smart boards to make up for feeling like stupid teachers, that sort of thing. I'm frequently on the record as saying that PowerPoint is one of the worst inventions of the 21st century, and that the system has atrophied teaching and by proxy learning. Suffice it to say that the best technology ever added to the classroom is the writing surface on the wall, the blackboard or the whiteboard. And I'm talking about the analog sort, not the digitally connected version. When you write or draw on the board, it enhances orality. It asks the observer to be co-creator in every word or marking that appears. PowerPoint is a way to put your teaching notes up in Gestalt form so students can copy things down for their test. There's no act of co-creation. There's only the surrender to the delivery metaphor of education, where the person at the front of the room has some sort of smart stuff to show off for the people in the desks to receive and regurgitate. I don't want you to get too distracted by my hatred for PowerPoint. I almost left it out of this talk completely. It's a bit like Upton Sinclair writing The Jungle as a socialist screed about the working conditions of poor immigrant laborers, only to find that his book became popular for the panic it instigated after people learned there were feces in their meat products. My intention here is to propose that we think more carefully about our practices as teachers. It's important to remember that methods and pedagogies are only as good as the relationships they create with learners, and that learners don't sit still indefinitely. The learners in our charge are in need of a whole variety of things, some of which are consistent and fairly universal, while others are deeply different for all the reasons I've explained. I come to this idea in part because I read Neil Postman and became inspired to take up his work. He called our media environments the primary curricula, where the business we conduct in schools is secondary. We're cognitively and culturally conditioned by our primary information environments before we ever set foot in schools. In general semantics, we might also refer to the situation as our semantic environment. We have a choice as teachers to continue developing our methods and techniques according to professional standards and practices, devised and tested across generations of schooling. In my estimation, many of these methods and techniques are simply inertia. They make up for the lack of imagination about what sorts of change are desirable in our relationships with students. Too often, because teachers are also the product of their environments, the outcomes are strongly connected to the sort of things students will, quote, need to know, or, quote, need to be able to do out in the world, wherever and whatever that is. I once heard a superintendent of a highly thought of school district in the greater New York metropolitan area tell a group of kindergarten parents that his mission was to prepare these poor 5- and 6-year-olds for the economy of the future. This man was paid in excess of $300,000 per year salary for this preposterous understanding of schools and education. I don't know that there's an ideal way to educate tens and hundreds of millions of people to a standard that any of us would consider ideal. It's difficult for me to imagine that we can find enough talented, loving, secure, and effective workers to take on the positions required for such a mission. And yet that's what we have to do. Maybe you've had a bad experience with a mechanic. Maybe you've had a bad experience at a restaurant. Maybe you've been on hold for what seems like 10 hours with a customer service representative who treated you callously and never solved your problem. I'm fairly certain most of you have had experiences with teachers that left you dissatisfied, confounded, or even traumatized. It's inevitable that there will be people in your experiences anywhere who will let you down in some way. It feels especially terrible, I think, when that person is a teacher. Now, we all remember our best teachers. Often these individuals exhibit excellent skills in communication. They're able to fluidly explain things in not only one way, but perhaps dozens of ways. They're able to express the same content in a variety of different modes, often all in a row, so that each person in the room has a chance to connect. They do this with joy, humor, passion, and most importantly, love. They communicate effectively in diverse ways, and they treat the people in their company with great concern and respect. These teachers have vivid and active imaginations. They invent and reinvent constantly. They take the spark of inspiration from some random observation or experience and weave it into something new to test with the learners around them. Yes, they're hopefully organized and diligent and all the things that go into any effective laboring, but to be remembered fondly for a lifetime is to exhibit the qualities that we hope to project into the lives of our students. We want them to be joyful. We want them to use language colorfully and imaginatively. We want them to find multiple modes of expression for their innermost thoughts and feelings. We hope that they can shift their perspectives on situations to understand what's happening around them in a way that keeps them suitably balanced, oriented, and in control of their lives. I sometimes talk about this in terms of composure. By the age of 8 or 9 years old, people in our society will have largely mastered the 26 phonetic characters of our alphabet, the 10 digits 0 through 9, and the 5 basic functions of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and equals or equivalence. 41 total characters make up that set, and we recognize the importance of that efficient little collection of symbols to life in our broader world. We're excellent at teaching young people how to work with those symbols and how to connect them to larger subjects like English, math, science, geography, and so on. School children know quite a lot, actually. We don't have a problem getting most young people to that point, and I call that a rousing success. But we continue to believe that the mastery of those symbols and their functions is the business of life itself. We have so much faith in those symbols, and no one exhibits this more than the most educated among us, that we forget as we expand outward in complexity across dozens and dozens of subjects that we're engaged in mind-boggling acts of abstraction. We use these symbols and many of their cousins besides to represent the life world we occupy in all of its myriad complexities, and we stop looking back in the other direction. Alfred Korzybski practically pleads with us to be conscious of this process and to take care in how we think. As we climb what general semanticists describe as a ladder of abstraction, we apply our symbols and language to ever-increasing levels of complex and abstract thought. In many ways, it's one of the miracles humans are able to perform, and it's responsible for individuals hardly different than our Homo sapien ancestors of 100,000 years ago, walking on the moon, orbiting our planet several times, in fact. But it's also the same miracle that saw mustard gas and carpet bombing and nuclear annihilation and a staggering cascade of human holocausts over the last century. Korzybski addresses these issues in his many works, including Manhood of Humanity and Science and Sanity, to name his best-known books. He warns us to be conscious of our process of abstraction, to remember that the word is not the thing, the map is not the territory. Whatever we say a thing is, it most certainly is not. As I conclude my address this afternoon, I realize that I haven't said nearly enough about the subject represented in the title of my talk. I have to be honest, this is a bit by design. You see, there's far too much to be said about this subject to fit into 10, 12, or 15 minutes. I'm going to conclude my remarks with a little teaser about what I mean and invite you to follow and read my work on the subject as I prepare a manuscript for publication in the hopefully not too distant future. Everybody says hopefully. As I mentioned a moment ago, we haven't changed that much physically over the tens of thousands of years since our subspecies Homo sapiens sapiens began to walk the earth. We still stand upright on 2 spindly legs. We still use our sensory organs to scan our environments. Our eyes are situated on the fronts of our heads, and we still ingest things found around us for sustenance. We're absolutely convinced of our vast superiority to those earlier versions of ourselves. To say otherwise almost seems preposterous at first glance, and yet, those people survived the harshest conditions our species have ever known with very little to aid them in their efforts. We owe them. They had to be fully engaged with their senses to avoid predators, to survive natural disasters, and to invent ways to overcome the harshness of their situations. We get very cranky when the air conditioning isn't working just right, and it strikes me that it's super cold in here right now. Those people also engaged in all manner of brutality. We think of them as brutes who clubbed each other over the heads. In fact, we're equally brutish in our appetites for violence, only we have far more advanced ways to harm one another. if in only an instant. If there's any merit in our belief that we're more advanced than or superior to those humans, it has to be in our capacity to reflect on ourselves and to apply our inventiveness and imagination to healthier and happier lives. We've made and remade the world 1,000,000 times over since the days of our early ancestors, but we haven't done all that much to remain aware and mindful of what we share with them and with one another. Our life world begins with our sensory experiences, but our educations largely begin with those symbols I mentioned before. Even if some of us pay attention to the senses through the exercise of mindfulness and meditation, those activities are largely the province of personal choice. It's my argument that the integration of sensory training to our educational routines roots us in our common experiences, with an important acknowledgement and appreciation for those among us who are differently organized in these ways. The consciousness of abstraction that we so desperately need might be genuinely rooted in our shared humanness, before we ever get to the complex stuff that makes us feel advanced or superior in comparison to the humans of our fading past. If you follow my thinking on this subject, I hope you'll also follow the greater arc of thinking represented in my ongoing work. And I also hope that this mode of teaching helps connect teachers who are not so naturally inclined to remember what we really want in our communities: a foundation of better and more satisfying human relations. We can do with a few less managers and mechanics and architects and rocket building billionaire entrepreneurs if we have healthier and happier communities of people. And the managers, mechanics, and architects in our communities will also hopefully be much better at their work from a humanistic point of view. Thank you. Alfred Korzybski.
Thanks, Mike.